What do you think of when I say the words finding aids? Likely something branching off of its literal meaning, something that helps you to find something else. But when the word archival is tacked on, suddenly this simple idea of searching takes on a whole new meaning. Searching archives is challenging for anyone, including those familiar with the minutiae of library catalogs and databases, and quite honestly, finding aids themselves do not help in this matter. Why is this still true? Why do finding aids continue to confound and alienate researchers? This overview of the history and use of finding aids aims to answer that very question. To begin to understand how finding aids function and why they even exist, we must first define archives themselves. Archives refers to permanently valuable records, to items that have continuing and lasting value across time. According to the Society of American Archivists, archives house the documentary evidence of past events. They are the facts we use to interpret and understand history. Archives are home to documents and materials in a wide variety of formats, covering almost every topic imaginable. Within an archive's holdings, these documents are classed into different collections that reflect some unique aspect of the items. Because of this, cataloging and inventorying these items and collections is a monumental task, but that is what a finding aid aims to do. A finding aid is a document that details the contents of a collection. The standard finding aid does not simply describe a single item like a card in a card catalog would. It instead outlines the entire collection like a table of contents or an inventory list. To understand why finding aids have this unique form, a quick dive into the history of American archives will give us the context we need. Archives are a natural result of human nature. We love to write things down, to keep track of important events, and an archive was simply an easy place to coalesce all of these writings. There are any number of reasons why an archive would form, but two in particular are extremely significant to the development of the finding aid within American archives. Historic manuscript archives that housed culturally important items, and public access archives that housed more pragmatic items like government and legal documents. Both types of archive took cues from the European archival world, but these traditions had vastly dissimilar goals, leading to competing standards of description and organization. In the 1930s and 40s, there were multiple attempts to bridge these gaps between the two worlds, all of which were mostly unsuccessful. But their work laid the ground for minor consensus. In 1941, the Library of Congress transitioned to organizing their collections, and by proxy their finding aids, by provenance. This means that the original owner, creator, or place of production determined where an item was housed within an archive, not by subject as is standard in libraries. While this might not seem like the most logical organizational system, it does help archival collections to retain a sense of their original intent. A collection created by a notable person might not have much commonality from piece to piece, but collectively they give a sense of that notable person's life, interests, and personality. Provenance helps archives to maintain this unique relationship within the items of the collection. Because of this decision, finding aids began to store both descriptive data, things like summaries, creators' names, and dates, alongside the less accessible archival data, things like collection number, origin, relationships, and other items that were intended primarily for archival staff. There wasn't a huge call for finding aids to be very accessible to non-archival staff at this time, which established a precedent that still exists to this day. Despite a growing and changing information world around them, archives and their finding aids struggled over the next few decades to find standards that suited the entire field. Yet the introduction of computers and digitization made it clear that changes were on the horizon. Computers began to make their mark on the library world in the 1960s, and archives within the United States attempted to digitize alongside their library counterparts. But implementing punch card systems and microfiche data was costly in both budget and time. It wasn't until the late 1970s that real progress was made on this front. Machine-readable cataloging, or MARC format, had made a big impression on the library world, allowing for easier searching across an entire catalog using bibliographic databases. Archives responded by adapting MARC for their own use, creating MARC format for Archival Manuscripts Control, shortened to MARC-AMC. This format, implemented in the 1980s and 1990s, harkened back to older practices where subject matter was a major classification of archival items, allowing archives to be searched by subject matter once again. But this did not make finding aids accessible overnight. MARC was created to store the data needed most by library collections, so even the adapted MARC-AMC lacked the deep and rich collection details needed specifically by archives. All of this led to the creation of a new format designed from the ground up to store archival data, Encoded Archival Description, or EAD. EAD allowed for entire finding aids to be encoded and transmitted on the open web. Like MARC-AMC, it stored subject matter information that made it searchable, while also containing all of the archival data needed by archival staff. MARC-AMC and EAD allowed for archives to move from analog paper finding aids to digital tools. But even with these advances, accessibility is still a struggle. When we look at the structure of a finding aid, it should be fairly clear why this issue persists. Traditionally, finding aids are analog tools, printed on paper and located on-site within an archive. Many archives still maintain paper finding aids today, often in addition to their digital finding aid counterparts. But even with the advent of digital formats, archives still lack standardization in how they create their finding aids. In fact, there are no standard key features. Despite this, the Society of American Archivists has identified the most common features found across most finding aids used within the United States. These are the 8 elements usually found within a finding aid, as illustrated by this example taken from the Library of Congress archives. Finding aids begin with a title page. This section names the archival repository itself, then introduces the specific collection. This is where the collection name will be found, as well as dates for the items within it, plus additional information about the creation of the collection and of the finding aid. Following the title page is the summary information section. In some ways, this section most reflects what is often found within a library's catalog. Information like the creator or creators of the materials, the size of the collection in boxes and linear feet, call numbers, languages of the materials, and a brief description of the collection's contents will be found here. In contrast to the summary information section is the access and use section. This section is largely clerical, giving copyright information, any use restrictions, and additional notes on how the collection was obtained by the archive. Background information is also provided. As the name suggests, this section is focused on providing additional background on the history of the collection and how it was created. Following that is scope, content, and arrangement. This section or sections gives an overview of the collection's contents and how it is arranged. There are occasionally different sections, series, and even sub-series within a collection, all of which is detailed here. Next is subject terms. This is a list detailing the contents and topics covered by the materials within the collection. The subject terms are usually linked to a library catalog to connect the materials to related media. This leads neatly into the next section, which is related materials. Instead of implying relationships like subject terms do, this section is intended to give concrete connections to closely related items. This relationship can be based on a number of things, such as origin, subject matter, or creator. The final section is one that every finding aid needs, the contents list. This is a complete listing of the materials found within the collection. The level of detail can vary substantially from organization to organization, but all of the contents of the collection should be found within this section. The eagle-eyed viewer likely noticed that many of the fields had a slightly different label on the Library of Congress finding aid than the names provided by the Society of American Archivists. This is just another example of the lack of standardization that is common in the field. Now that we know a bit about the history of finding aids and how they are structured, we can look more deeply into how to use finding aids within an archive environment. As mentioned, finding aids were developed to be used primarily by archival staff. This is why the structure contains such a varied mix of useful, descriptive data that can help a researcher find the materials they need, and clerical data that is designed to support and reinforce archival practice for the staff. This plays a massive role in the way researchers use archives and the finding aids themselves. Because of this, finding aids serve as a type of topographical map that can give users a sense of the geography of a collection. Often, archive users will revisit a finding aid multiple times along their way to the items they need. They can also give the seasoned researcher a solid understanding of the purpose, content, and creators of the collection through becoming familiar with the finding aid. This is reinforced by the main strength of a finding aid, succinctly and purposefully detailing the contents of any type of archival collection in a vaguely similar way. This can help researchers appraise the collection as a whole, giving them a useful guide to the archive. Considering that the vast majority of archival items are viewable only in person on site, this can save researchers a great deal of travel and stress when deciding which archives are worth physically visiting. But even digitized versions of finding aids struggle to address the accessibility issue that has plagued them since their inception. There has always been a need for more subject matter information on archival materials, something that both MARC-AMC and EAD attempted to provide, but the persistent struggle to create a shared standard across the wide spectrum of American archives has kept this goal from being truly met. MARC-AMC created a precedent of using the Library of Congress subject heading system to encode subject matter information, but EAD has no such strict standard. There is still some adherence to using MARC-AMC standards, but there is no actual consensus on the matter. The amount and depth of subject matter description varies vastly within the archival world and occasionally even within the same organization. Part of the resistance to creating a unified system is that EAD is accessible through the open web. Instead of having a controlled thesaurus of subject headings, open web keyword searches do not rely on a finite set of subject terms. To some degree, this makes searches easier as a researcher can use any version of a subject term to create broad or narrow searches at their discretion. but there is no guarantee that the researcher has found all or even the best resources available. Combine this with the already complicated structure of a finding aid, and it is clear why they still carry the stigma of being inaccessible. Finding aids are a unique and storied part of American archives. Their history traces the successes and failures of the field to truly adapt to a changing environment and to the needs of their users. As we all continue to push towards more open and accessible collections across the information world, it is my hope that one day soon finding aids will also uphold these lofty goals, be it through growth and change, or through being replaced by a system that better serves the needs of archivists and archive users. My thanks go to the Society of American Archivists site and the King Library for their resources that helped me compile this presentation. My thanks also go to you for listening. Happy researching, everyone.